Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We are at poem 256, If I Am Lost Now. Now, this is a fascinating poem for a number of reasons. It is pretty clear that Emily was very influenced by her upbringing within her Protestant faith, and no question, the music of that worship assembly that she grew up in and at times struggled against finally leaving, those hymns were very significant. Consider the fact that this poem plays around with that famous line from John Newton's Amazing Grace, I once was lost, but now I'm found. That, of course, published in 1779. In some ways, we'll ask, is this Emily's response to that very hymn itself? And of course, all of the, especially New Testament parables and stories that Christ will tell about being lost and being found, the sheep that's lost and then is found by the shepherd and that kind of thing. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of previous introductory comments, and as well, I'm very hopeful that you worked through the preceding 255 poems. We just finished with 255 to die, just takes a little while. Now, many will argue, that this is in fact one of the quote-unquote master poems, or a poem specifically for Sam Boyles, who we've spoken of several times in earlier lectures. And in that regards, it's going to be a poem about rejection. Again, we've seen this a number of times. And the challenge of this poem is everything in this poem depends on who the you, sir, is. Most scholars believe it's probably Sam Boyles, who she feels somehow has rejected her. Maybe it will have something to do with the poetry that she was trying to share with him. She says it this way: If I'm lost, now that I was found, shall still my transport be. That once on me those jasper gates blazed open suddenly. That in my awkward gazing face the angels softly peered and touched me with their fleeces, almost as if they cared. I'm banished now, you know it. How foreign that can be. You'll know, sir, when the Savior's face turns so away from you. It's interesting that she didn't say thee to rhyme with be, and rather she used the word you. Now, some have read this as a major payback type of poem. In other words, it's almost like Yeats's when you're old and gray. That notion of, I hope when you're old that you'll regret the fact that you were once in love with me and then you became out of in love with me. It isn't clear who the you, sir, is and what the you, sir, has done. But it is clear that she feels that once she was lost, then she was found, again back to Newton's hymn, and yet somehow banishment has happened. Let's study it. She says, if I'm lost now, and I think that the real pause here should probably be, if I'm lost, now that I was found, shall still my transport be. I think that's probably the right way to read this line. She will use in 41 poems the word lost. It is clearly one of Emily's important words. And she'll say it this way, if I'm lost. Notice it's the if. In other words, if I'm unavailable, in the context of the poem, if it is Sam Boyles, if I'm no longer capable of having you as my friend or acquaintance, if I am lost, now that I was found, the idea that, there was a moment, shall still my transport be. Now, again, she'll use this religious language. Later it will be touched. There will be angels involved. There will be jasper gates of heaven from Revelation 21:18. So all of this is that language of religion, spirituality, and yet it's cast in this amazing approach of a secularism. Notice, notice all the S sounds, all the hard sibilants in this poem. Shall still my transport be that once on me. Notice we go from once to now, right? Banished now. Once on me, those jasper gates, obviously a reference, as we said, to Revelation 21:18, heaven, blazed open. Suddenly, pay attention to the adverbs here, suddenly, softly. That in my awkward, it's an interesting use of that word, run to ground how she uses it in her other poems, gazing face, in my awkward gazing face, the angels softly peered. This takes us back, of course, to poem 7 that we studied, whose peasants are the angels. In 24 different poems, she'll reference angels of some kind or another. The angels softly peered and touched me with their fleeces. Some have read this as the poetic inspiration, the inspiration of the muse and all of that. Almost as if they cared. And again, the use of the word almost takes us to the word perhaps. And I told you when we get to poem 696, acres of perhaps, this is one of the key words. And this idea of it almost happened, but it didn't happen, right? Almost as if the angels cared. It's a sarcastic line. It's a dark line. Many see this as a very dark poem. I'm banished now. So we go from once to now. I'm banished now. And then you know it. Now, again, who this you is going to determine everything about this poem. How foreign, strange that can be, that feeling of banishment. As if somehow whoever the you is of this poem doesn't know what that's like. By the way, banished only gets used once and only once in all her poetry, and it's right here. How foreign that can be. You'll know, sir, when the Savior's face turns so away from you. And again, the would have been the word that rhymed, and it's fascinating that she decided not to do it. By the way, you'll remember poem 217 with Savior. It worked like this. Savior, I've no one else to tell, and so I trouble thee. I am the one forgot thee, so dost thou remember me. I think it works rather well here. And then when we get to poem 1487, it'll be like this. The Savior must have been a docile gentleman to come so far, so cold a day. For little fellowmen, the road to Bethlehem, since he and I were boys, was leveled. But for that, 'twould be a rugged billion miles. Her use of the word Savior is fascinating. When she says the Savior is going to turn away from you in the same way that you have turned away from me. Now, again, everything in the poem depends upon who this you is, and we just don't know. One of the reasons we would love to sit down with Emily and have this chat with her face to face, or behind the door, or at the bottom of the stairs, or however it was happening at the end of Emily's life. One of the questions we would be is, okay, in a poem that we call today 256, who is the you, sir? Who is that? Notice at 2B, I'm sorry, at 2A, I think the major message here is that rejection is hard, right? It's hard to feel like somebody, you were so close, and then all of a sudden it's all gone. At 2B, again, the word choices here, like banished, are fascinating. At 3A, I can't help but think on the one side of Keats and the rejection that he felt, and again, we've studied this at learnstrong.net, especially when I have fears that I may cease to be. You'll remember that on the shore of that wide world is stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do seem. Keats was always challenged by the fact that people didn't accept his poetry as being what we today, of course, know it to be, amazing. And then I think about Dante. Remember when he shows up as the pilgrim in Limbo, and he wants to be included with the great poets, and of course Virgil is for him the greatest. That longing to be accepted. It's very possible that's what's going on here. Emily wants her poetry to be understood and appreciated by somebody like Boyles. Boyles' rejection of her and her poetry will be much like the Savior rejecting Boyles, she says. Finally, at 3B, to own a poem like this, what was a time that you felt this feeling of rejection and that feeling of being banished? I mean, we can't help but think of poor Romeo, right? Being banished, from Verona to Mantua, and he'll say it over again, banished, banished. I hope that this poem challenges you a little bit to think. Thank you.